right, it's vital for us to have a good understanding of what we are doing in Visual Studio. So I thought we should pause at the moment and have a clue about what we're doing in Visual Studio. So we have a Visual Studio screen right now, and you can notice that we have a form in here. Now, this portion of the screen typically represents actually harbors the controls that you can use to make or to design a user interface for an application. So here on the left part of the screen we have controls, and on the right hand side of the screen we have the properties that reflect the currently selected object in this design space. So this is the design space, and if you notice that we have business info here, where we have form business info, and that is actually a control, and this is the form, and these are the properties that are associated with this form. If you selected the business name level, you'll notice that these properties of the screen will actually change to the business name level. If you select the business name text box control, this part of the screen will also reflect the changes to the properties that are associated with the text box control. If you select either the edit button or the cancel button, these properties also will change to properties associated with the delete button. And that is one very fundamental thing I need you to understand when you're building out Windows application or building out desktop application using Visual Studio. So the next thing I want us to go through again is that we actually designed this form, and we made use of a text box control, and we made use of a combo box control and a button control. Actually, the form itself is a control in Visual Studio, and a control and a container control that can contain every other element. I forgot to highlight that this is actually a control. The label control itself these are label controls. The business name, address, email are actually label controls. I'm sorry I didn't reflect that here. So that is typically how we use controls. We use controls to build a user interface that the user can use and interact with the application. There is something very vital I want us to understand, is that, for instance, in the combo box concept, which is this control actually represents a combo box. The combo box typically has a data source that lists where it's like a list where people can, where users can actually select what they want as to be. Where you select, they have a drop-down list where you select the options you want. And typically in Visual Studio, this is referred to as a control, and the control normally has a property which actually we could bind to a binding source. And in most cases, some controls can have a direct binding source, not just the property, the direct binding source as well. And most controls also have the ability to have data sources where you can bind, specify this data source that this control can bind to, and you can also bind the binding source that the control binds to a data source. And that is what I wanted you to understand before we proceed. Okay, so almost all the controls, including text box, input box, always have a binding source. And let's get to Visual Studio and see practically what I mean by the binding properties in the .NET, or in using the .NET technology on the Windows Form application development. Visual Studio, and you can notice that, let me show you one thing. I can pin this here. If I pin this here, you notice the very first component I selected is the business info. If I select the text box property, you notice this property is actually changed. If I select the business level, it actually changes to the business level. If I select the address level, it changes. If I select this text address, it will change. If I select the date, it can change. If I select the cancel, it also changes. And those are the ways you can manipulate the properties in a particular control. So let's go back here. First and foremost, we can run this application so that we know where we were, and we can come back and continue. So actually there is an error here. Let's go and check. Okay, I remember something. So what actually made us go back there, what actually made us post this video in the first place, was I needed to explain to you the concept of binding source. and data source. So here we have a combo box that we want to bind, and let's not bind it inside here because most times it's actually needed. Let's create a binder for that. So here I could come and say public void bind accounting methods. Let me use the word accounting methods. That is the correct terminology, and that is what we need to do. So to bind the accounting methods, I need to establish where my component is going to come from. So the very first thing I'm going to say is that this dot cab accounting method, this dot, let's minimize this at the moment because I don't have a need for it. This dot cab accounting method dot, here I'm going to talk about the binding, or let's say the data source. Okay, the data source, and I'm going to point it to a particular service that I require. If you check out what we did implement in we have this accounting system constructs that we created when we were designing for the Windows for the API. So what we will do here is I'm going to call the accounting methods here, and it will give me every list of accounting methods that we have there. And this was a static function, and we can go ahead and call it inside our application, or we can also use dependency injection to inject the static function, but there is actually no need for that. So let's go ahead and call that static function. So we'll say account system constructs. I think that is what we call it. Let's go check it again. Let's go and check it again. Is account system constructs, right? So account system constructs. Let's use the word constructs. That's what we use. Though we first actually use this, we need to add reference to it, as the case may be. And our reference is inside using this accounting business logic. And here I would say, do me a favor, get accounting methods. I would just call the accounting methods, and that contains a list of everything that I need, and that is what I want. The next property is that I'll go inside and grab the CB accounting method, and I say display member. Display member is what the user chooses, all right, in the drop down list. So display member, I'm going to map to a property of this return. Whatever this returns a list of objects, and if you inspect this object properly, you notice that we have a value and a description. All right, so that is basically what the object contains: a list that contains a value and a description. So what I will do is that inside here I would specify that this should bind to the description. The display member should bind to the description property of this object that is being returned. And the value member is a member that actually, when a user selects which of the value do you want me to hold in memory for what the user has selected. All right, in this case we want it to bind to the value. All right, so because we have a property here called value, this is property is what I want. When you select, when a user selects, whatever that represents that selection, the value here is what I want. And let's come back here, and we can see we have the value, and we're using description so that whatever the user binds, that's what we will see. So let's come back here, and while this form loads, I would like to also bind accounting methods. I would like to call that method so that that gets bound automatically as well. So let's go ahead and run this and have a good look at it now. So this is up and running. Let's come to business information, and you can see this actually shows a curl, but truth to be told, we haven't specified what it is. And you can now see that we have every account, all the accounting methods, all the specified accounting methods in that list shown in our form. That's what I wanted to show you. To actually bind this form to a particular property, the ways we can do it, we can do a direct assignment like this. Alright, so here I'm going to show you, instead of doing a direct assignment like this, which I would have said this, for instance, I would have said this dot cmb cb accounting methods dot selected value. The selected value is, or selected item, or use the selected value is going to be like selected value is equals to accounting method. But that is not what I need. I don't want that to be the case. I want to show you a different way of actually binding that to that. So the very first thing I normally do is I'll call data bindings. Then I'll clear whatsoever thing is there. So what the data bindings clear does is clears any initial collection of any bindings. And once I do that, I can initiate a new binding. So I say cb.accounting method.data bindings dot add, and I can add a new binding. Alright, I'm just showing you a different way of actually a new binding. And the new binding constructor takes three properties. What property do you want to bind to? So here I want to bind to the selected value property of the combo box. And where is the data coming from? The data is actually coming from business info. That's the data source. And which property of the business info do you want to bind to? I want to bind to the accounting method property of this data source. And basically that is how you can create a new binding in. That's another way you can actually get a value and associate it to a property on a control in Windows Form application. And that is better. So we can come in here and run the applications again, and you notice that that is bound to we cannot really spot the difference because we cannot tell that is bound to the. Alright, this is better. Alright, and we let's go ahead and check what we actually binding to in this case, because we've called cleared bindings and we need to. I think I've done a little mistake. Let me check that again. Right, so obviously we're getting an empty uncaptured select value, because the accounting method here is actually an integer, and the value here is actually of a string type and not a representation of an integer. All right, that is what is happening, because inside the system struct value, this value here is of type, it's not actually an integer. So we should actually do the casting to cast this back to an integer like this. Once we do that, we can now come back to our form business info and run it again, and now we should be able to actually get the actual and correct value for the selected value. So let's wait and let's have that build. Alright, so we can go ahead and check it now, and we can see that a curl is captured. To ensure that that binding is actually working very well, we can come in here and say, let's mutate the business info we have in here and change the accounting method to 2. And let's do that and see whether we can, and be sure that that actually works exactly very well. So we can come here and we can check that, okay, so that works well. So it changes now from a curl to cache, and this is good enough for us. Let's move on to the next thing as well. Let's close this, and now when the form loads, we should have this information, and that information gets bind into the controls. But there is something that is obvious. You can Let's launch that again. We can change those values, and it will change. But that is not supposed to be the case in a practical sense, because what should happen if we can come here and change this to Samsung and Sons Limited, and you see that is happening without us actually clicking the edit button to do that. And you see we can actually change these values, but that doesn't mean that they are saved. In a typical application, what will actually happen is that you should be able to actually, this form should have state. That's what I do in my systems. So for instance, this form could be in an edit state, or could be in a save state, or could just be in a view state. Those three states, all right? So I assign my form a state, and I make adjustments to the logic based on the states the form is. So let's go ahead and actually do this. When the form loads the first instance, all these controls should actually be uneditable, unless you click edit. All right, so that is what I want us to see. And let's make it like a real application, what a real application should actually be like. So we can go ahead and close this at the moment, and we can come here and this point. And what happens when the form initially loads? We should have a state monitoring engine and or state management service, something that we can play around and we can toggle the state of an application. All right. So here we can come in here and say, let's think of a way we can do this. Okay, let's say like view mode, void. Let's put void view mode. All right. View mode. Let's keep that. And in this view mode, we can come in with some configurations. For instance, we can take this properties and mutate them programmatically. So here we'll put this, and I will make some adjustments. Like I'll say this dot enabled equals to false, and I'll do that for the rest of the properties. This should be enabled false. This should be enabled false. This should be false as well. And here, let's remove this. This was just for testing. Let's remove this. And here we can put this dot enabled equals to false. So this will actually show the correct values that are in there, but they are all disabled. So when this form launches for the very first time, when it loads, I want to activate the view state. And here I would say, what I need you to do is view mode. Just call view mode. Activate view mode. All right. Call view mode, and this is what I want. All right. Let's run it and see what happens, whether we can actually make changes to the form, or let's see. And that launches. And we can go ahead and check this out. And you see now we cannot actually do anything. You can only see, look at the information, but we cannot make changes to it because it's disabled. It's locked. You cannot change it. All right. So let's go ahead, and that's what we wanted. The next thing we need to do is, once they edit, if it's in view mode, and let's do this. Let's change the button properties. All right, let's mutate the button properties. Currently, its default is edit. All right, if we want to actually edit a business information, what happens? So once the edit is clicked, and we can mutate that. We can say void edit mode, and we can come up with another function and copy all this properties, and we could change this to true. All right. But there's something I noticed. we're actually just changing the values, all right? And we can actually have one function to do this. We can have something like says toggle mode, toggle mode, like that, and we can say or toggle controls. Let's do this. We can have toggle controls, and we can have void edit mode. Let's do this, edit mode. And here we can say toggle controls like passing a bool state, and whatever state we pass in here, that should be what we should use. All right, so we can do this, so we don't repeat cells again. And edit mode, we can say toggle controls, and we pass in true in that case. And we can also do the same thing here, and we can say view mode toggle controls, we say false. All right, and that looks better for me. Those are the two states we have. We have edit mode and we have the view mode. So what server mode we are, once we click the edit button, let's come back here. Sorry, the designer is trying to resolve the view. So let's go into the code behind file. Once we click the edit button, we should just enter view mode. All right, edit mode, and that is all we need to call. All right, and that is good enough for us. When the form loads, it's in view mode. When we toggle, it's in edit mode. And once it is in edit mode, we can actually make some other changes. If it's in edit mode, we can go ahead and say that what's the name of this button again? That the button edit should be button edit should not just be enabled, but text should change to save changes. Sorry, that as a string, so it should be save changes, or save, just let it be save. All right, and let's go ahead and see what that looks like. So let's run this again, and the main idea of designing with Windows Form or building desktop application is that it gives you the foundational knowledge to think about or to understand how your day-to-day, the systems you use, how they are actually developed. All right, so it gives you good insight into some basic understanding. So we have the business formation, and initially the initial state is in view mode. When we click edit, you see it changes and the button changes to save, so we can mutate, and we can change this to Samson and Sons, and we can go ahead and click the save button for something to happen. So first, if you click the save button, nothing actually happens. All right, nothing. The system doesn't know about anything. And that brings me to the next point. All right, so this can change to save, and most times we should have a flag. We can come up with a flag that tells us which state this form is. You'll see the advantage of that, because this, when you click in edit mode, all right, we're clicking in edit mode and we need something else with that form. We cannot get something else, so let's do something else. So we will create a flag, and I'll call it form state. I'll say boolean. I'm thinking, should I have an enumeration that tells the different state of a form, and based on that we can actually make some manipulations. Let me think about that and come up with an idea. Alright, so we have that in place now, and we have just one function, edit mode. So we can go ahead and create a flag for this form. And we can say some kind of a little enumeration that tells what state this form is. So we can say enum form state. We can hand it over basic properties. For instance, we can set uninitialized. Let's have two states for the moment. Let's have say a date, and let's have view state, view. Then we can have, let's just keep views, and we have edit state like that, and probably that is better. Let's just start out with these two functionalities of form state, and here we can, once we mutate a property, we can actually come in here and say form state, and we can say form state like that. Let's go ahead and do it. And the initial value of this form state should be form state.view. Let's keep it that simple. Alright, that is the initial value of the form state. And in doing this, we can come down here, and when we are in edit mode, we can say that the form state, we can come in here and say form state. Let's say form state is equals to form state dot edit. And that is the state we are in. Alright. And we can, when we are in view mode, we can say that form state equals to, form state equals form state dot view. Let's have that toggling state. Now, based on that, we can actually play around with our application. So here, if we're in edit mode, we can just say toggle edit. So what actually happens is when, for instance, I'll say if form state, I need a way to toggle this in a beautiful manner. I'm thinking about it. Okay, now we are in edit mode. What do we do when we want to actually, when it is in save mode? What do we actually do? So toggle form state. So we need to actually check if this will not work. Let's have a different function in here again that will actually toggle form state and know what to do at each point in time. When the form initially loads, we could toggle state. All right, let's come to toggle controls. Let's do toggle state based on whatever mode the form is. All right, we can actually just have a function void toggle form state, and this actually should take in a form state like that, and say state will form, and based on that we will actually perform some operations. And yeah, this is beautiful. I think I appreciate this aspect. So here we can actually have a switch statement that actually takes a state. All right, a state state, and based on the state we can have generated views like that. All right, so doing this, if it's in a view state, we can all go ahead and say view mode, just call view mode, and basically that is all we need to do. And if it is in whatever is the state of the form, if it's an edit state, just call edit mode. Actually we may actually not even need the view mode and the edit mode again, because it doesn't make sense. So actually we can say if it's form state toggle controls. So we can go ahead and call toggle controls and set to false, and we can come here and call toggle controls and set to true. We can actually do that. All right, and we don't need the view mode and edit mode again. Or do we actually do that? For now, let's get those out. We don't need them. And here we can actually change this .txt, no, button edit dot text. We can change that text. We can actually change that to save. And whenever we are in edit mode, and whenever we are back to view mode, we can actually change this to edit, right? And that is better. And we, instead of doing this, we can just say toggle form state, and we can pass in the form state we want, which is view, and that's all we need. So doing it this way, we can actually notate the different state, and we can change it as the case may be. So let's come back here. Since there's no edit mode here, we can only just do one thing. Let's do this. If we are in a form state, let's say form state, if form state dot view, if form state equals to form state dot view, okay, then we can just go ahead and do toggle edit, toggle form state, and we can say form state dot edit, and that is basically what we need to do. So we can do the form state view, and we can change it to toggle edit. Another thing we can actually do is, and once we do this, we can actually return and don't do anything, just do that. If another condition, if form state dot edit mode, if form state equals to form state dot edit, if this is the case, here we can actually do another thing. We can perform some edit related operations, like persist to the database, and once we've done that, we change the toggle state again back to we toggle the form state again. So that is my opinion. I think that is what we should do. So if it is form state edit, we can actually create a new object. So for instance, we can say var command equals to new probably update. Let's use the word update business. Say anything like update business command. I think so. Let's go ahead and check that if we have that. No, we do not. Sorry, we do not. And I just went, sorry. This is a different software. Let's go inside and check business. When we need to persist business information, what actually are we changing to do that? And we have get business. Say if we are passing in a business data object. Alright, so it's the same old data object we are actually passing in. And sorry about this. So we can do, what we can do is we can actually say we already have the business service here. We can come here and say business service dot save business, and we can actually return the business info object. Sorry, we can actually save the business info object, and that is what we need to do. This is what we need to do. Save business returns a GID. Maybe no here. Yeah, because what we can go ahead and check if business info is not null, then we can go ahead and just do some mutations and be sure. If it is not null, not need to say that, just check if it's null. Let's do that. If it's null, we can go ahead and instantiate a new business info. Business info is equals to new business data object. We can do that, and we can go ahead and save that. Now, based on what we are not doing binding here, as the case may be. So we're just assigning values to this control. All right. So if we're actually doing binding, whatever we type inside this will actually bind to this element, and I'll show you that in another case. But let me show you in a more simpler way. So here we can actually say that business info, the business name is equals to that whatever you signed there. And we can go ahead and say business info dot address is equals to what inside the address text. You can go ahead and say business info dot email, is equals to whatever we put in as email. This dot text, email dot text, and we can go ahead and say business info dot phone, and this can also be the same thing. This dot text phone. Sorry, not text email, text phone dot text, and we can have that. We can go ahead. I think those are the four main things. All right, yeah, we're correct. And already we don't need to pass in a different value because this is already bound to what we have there. So before we actually save this, I would like to show you what we've captured and what we're sending to the database. So probably we could have a different form done. All right, let's just leave that. I'll put a breakpoint here so we can have an idea what we're talking about. So I'll say you can insert a breakpoint here. Insert a breakpoint, just breakpoint, and we can come in here, insert a breakpoint so we can inspect this object. So let's go ahead and run that again and see what happens when we change the state and what. So let's run this, and so we have a form here. We can come back here and say business, and already it's in the proper state, is in a disable state, so we can say enable. We can change this to Thompson's and Sons, like Thompson and Sons Limited or LLC. Just put limited. All right, Thompson's and Son Limited, like that, and we can change the numbers to something else. All right, and we can change this to cash accounting. All right, and let's click save. We're not hitting the breakpoint. Probably there's something I forgot to do. Form state.edit, toggle form state.edit. Let's check this. When we say toggle form state, oh, I did a mistake. We did not actually mutate the form state. So here we need to do that again. So we say form state. We need to put the current form state we are actually. Form state equals to form state dot view, and that is what we need to do. And in here we can say form state dot edit. I'm beginning to realize that probably we should have left the edit mode and all that mode and keep them there, but it's okay. So we do that now. I could see that probably there is hot reloading happening. Let's go back to our application and see what happens again. Let's click save. Obviously it's not happening. Let's close this and let's run the application again. So we can come here and actually check this and click edit and click change it to Thompson and Sons Limited, like that. I can change the phone number to some form of number and change this to cash. Let's see what happens. I think I'm missing something. We did a mistake. That actually has mutated that information. So because I can't remember when I removed the breakpoint, because I put a breakpoint here. I did insert a breakpoint in here so that we can actually inspect this object. And the idea was, once this is done, we can toggle the form UI state again, toggle form state, and change this to form state dot view. That was my idea, and I forgot. I don't know when I wrote the breakpoint. Let's see whether those changes actually were persisted in the database, and let's have a good look at it one more time. I would know. I believe they were persisted. So we had that persisted in the database. I'm actually sorry about that. So let's go ahead and edit it again to Thomson coding series, and we can let the rest be, and we can just change this to a curl. Let's hit this. Now we hit the breakpoint because I wanted you to see what was inside the business info. So if you go through the business info, you can actually see that it's using accounting method 1, and that is what I wanted to show you. But we did not make any changes or assignment here, because what happens is that this binding here, actually, whatever you do to a control, it is reflected in this property directly, and that's the advantage of binding like that. Okay, so that is one way, and that's what I wanted to demonstrate. That's why I put the breakpoints here. So if we go ahead and actually continue executing, we should have our form state change back to Thomson coding series, and this changes back to a date. And that is one of the things I wanted to show you on. So we have I wanted to show you in how you can play with how you can do a couple of things with your Windows Form application. So we have built a front-end, a user interface, a presentation that users of TCS accounting can use to manipulate their business information. All right, and you can notice that this changes also to Thomson. This hasn't changed yet to Thomson and Sons, to Thomson coding series, because we've not written that. But if we close this and launch this application again, this actually will change to Thomson coding series. That has the name of the company using TCS accounting. So we can go ahead and remove this breakpoint. We don't need it at the moment. And you notice now that we have Thomson coding series as the name of the company that is using TCS accounting. You can ask, Dominic, why can't we actually, when we write that instruction, we want Thomson coding series to change instantly when the name of the application changes? We can actually do that, but I'll leave that for an assignment. You can go ahead and play so that you can deepen your learning experience and make it broader your learning experience. And let's go ahead and implement all the functionalities for this application. So we've done that for business application and for business information service. And you've seen how we played and use one form to do editing, saving, mutating information. And that is good enough for me. Let's go ahead and build other components of TCS accounting.